Welcome, welcome, welcome. Happy Wednesday. It is August 10th. Welcome to another episode of Bitcoin Magazine Live. It is I, your host, Q, coming to you yet again from Bitcoin Magazine HQ in Nashville. And I'm joined by my co-host, P. How goes it, P?
It goes.
Woof.
Excuse me. It goes amazing. I failed on all fronts there. I was going to spin around in my chair and be like, oh, hey, I didn't see you there. But then not only that, but I coughed. It's great, man.
Oh, you
Very excited. I'm
bit
excited.
off more than you could chew?
Yeah, I did. I'm excited for the Nashville meetup tonight. It's going to be fucking lit. But we got some serious news to talk about. Let's get into it.
We do. We have a jam-packed episode, and shout out to everyone in the Nashville area or people who've come into town like myself to join the ever expanding and growing Nashville meetup. So if you're in town, you better come through. We'll kick things off in a moment with news and notes, and then we'll be joined by Sam Callahan from Swan to talk all things CPI and the economy. Let's dive into it, boys. If I can find the Google Doc. Too many tabs. All righty. BitPay launches cashback rewards for BitPay cardholders through a partnership with Cardlytics. Yeah, I'm going to commit to saying it, Cardlytics. Congrats to those who are BitPay card holders. If you don't have a BitPay card and this interests you, I guess do it. Not a sponsor. P, you got the next one?
Absolutely. Launchcard.com has teamed up with OpenNode, which is a fantastic service that makes it easy to accept Bitcoin payments, to give their e-commerce sellers the ability to accept Bitcoin globally. Launchcard is it's a competitor to a lot of these other services. In and of itself, this is a moderately sized deal, just because it increases the ease with which people that are not necessarily Bitcoin aficionados understand how everything works to just start accepting Bitcoin super easily, and also because it integrates with so many existing systems that people are using. So it's a big plus. The more, the merrier. Let's fucking go.
For our next story, the SEC to propose requirements for hedge funds to report crypto exposures. Look, this may not read as much, and this may read as, more regulation. The significance of this for me, if you've been paying attention to what I've been saying for the past 6-7 months, the correlation in the NASDAQ reads as though big money players are investing in Bitcoin, no different than the way they invest in equity stocks. So that is these hedge funds that have not had to report what they hold in Bitcoin or other crypto assets, buying and selling their shares in the same way they're buying and selling shares of Apple, Tesla, or whatever other stocks they own. I think it'll be really interesting if this actually goes through, more because we will, in the Bitcoin space, get a better sense of which funds are interested in Bitcoin, which ones are buying, holding, selling, how much their allocation positions are. It could be really interesting. It could be a whole lot of nothing, but just something to be aware of.
Definitely. We have the Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. partners with Engiven to accept crypto donations. Crypto donation platform Engiven has been selected by the Roman Catholic Church, Archdiocese of Washington, D.C. to boost their next generation of fundraising. Actually, in 2020, during that year, they actually ended up accepting over $1.1 million worth of crypto donations over that year to help families in need with times and money being very tight during the pandemic. It's kind of a win, but kind of a loss, because at first they were accepting donations, and obviously that's a good thing. We wish it was just Bitcoin instead of crypto. That's one thing. P actually brought up and caught up to a point that they're actually partnering with chain analysis firms as well, or at least Engiven is. So it's kind of like a step in the right direction, but then one step in the right direction, 2 steps in the wrong direction. It does seem like a good thing that they're trying to help people, obviously, and with being the Roman Catholic Church, last time I checked, is still the largest religion in the world, with over 1 billion people in the religion. So very interesting. It's definitely, Bitcoin is for everyone. It's for the masses. It's for any religion, whether, whatever faith or denomination you are. But very interesting. I'd say one step forward, 2 steps back kind of deal. But let's see. Hopefully they can go in the right direction.
I kind of feel like if there was a way to say this is a top signal that the church is now getting involved, I'd say that, but there's
I
no
know,
top
we're at a
anywhere
fucking
in
bottom.
sight.
This is a
And
bear market. I think
this ain't a bottom signal, that's for damn sure, but
Exactly.
like this is a top signal.
Exactly. I mean, there's so much about this specific cycle that has been so different from all others. I mean, obviously the macroeconomic environment, which we're going to be talking about later, is very different, but yeah, everything's topsy-turvy. But I think this is great. I mean, even with all the forced selling pressure on Bitcoin over the last couple of months, we're still, coming in strong. And then to see stuff like this, where I would expect everybody to be like, Bitcoin and, quote unquote crypto is the worst. Like, fuck that. We have stories like this. So
Q, I'm not gonna lie, it definitely reads like a top. Like I can see this, like the Catholic Church is like rugging people as it's like dumping on their retail and parishioners. So I mean, yeah, maybe this is going to be a lower bottom. I know Ansel and CK were saying as we chop sideways and we don't see like a price going up, it normally the bottom falls out. I hope that's not the case, but it remains to be seen.
We shall see. The number of addresses with over 1 Bitcoin hits all-time high amid a volatile market. Shout out to all the whole coiners out there. Maybe one day we'll all be as rich as P.
Oh God. I mean, I never made it to a full coin, but as you all know, I like to ride jet skis, and I crashed my last one into the body of a dead whale, and then the whale exploded. And in the explosion, all the meat, the little giblets everywhere, the sharks came. I lost all my Bitcoin. Don't let it happen to you.
P's being modest though. In case you guys didn't know this, did you know that the concept of a wealthy benefactor is actually based on P?
Look, we don't talk about the fact
they
that
rewrote tax laws because of him.
Look, the fact that I'm over 200 years old has nothing to do with this. I've been harvesting adrenochrome for years. That's a totally separate thing. Let's continue though. There's a clip of our dearest evil overlord, Nancy Pelosi. Roll the clip.
We still support the one China policy. We go there to acknowledge the status quo is what our policy is. There was nothing disruptive about that. It was only about saying China is one of the freest societies in the world. Don't take it from me. That's from Freedom House.
Let's talk a little bit.
Democracy, courageous people, and it's just, I don't know why it is, except there's some commercial interest who would like to diminish the relationship.
What the actual fuck? Like, come on. First of all, for me at least, the audio was slightly out of sync, but I don't actually think it was. I think just the animatronic cyborg, motors that operate her flesh mouth, were off. And so that's why it seemed out of sync. Anyway, what an insane statement. China is one of the freest countries in the world. She almost like choked as she was saying it because
I got a few work camps to show her on her next visit to China.
Unbelievable.
Beg to differ.
She struggled to even get the words out, which is incredible. To P's point, it sounded like it was like animatronic in that way.
She sucks.
I'm getting reports that my audio is also out of sync, implying that I am also an animatronic meat puppet. I'm going to be right back. I'll fix it. Guys, keep the show going.
Sigh. Alrighty. Well, in the same vein, the Paul Pelosi, Nancy Pelosi, NVIDIA stock trade could be coming to an end. Worth pointing out really quickly before I share this next bit of news, NVIDIA stock has been down 10% this week. I cannot wait for next month's report when you see all of the trade by congresspeople and their spouses. And if we see any sort of a sell on some of those NVIDIA options that Paul Pelosi purchased, dated last week, I'm gonna call foul. But
she already sold out. You didn't hear that? They sold for a loss.
The fuck's going on, people? All right. Well, President Biden signed the $280 billion Chips and Science Act into law this week, which includes $52 billion for U.S. semiconductor production. Cool. Yeah, let's just print more money. Look, at the root of it, do we need to figure out how to get these semiconductor manufacturing here stateside? Absolutely. Do I think the government should be stepping in to print more money for the sake of all these things? No. Quite literally, that's called socialism. But who's keeping score? Me. I'm keeping score. Is P back? Is he
Of
not?
course I'm back. I'm always back.
He's back.
Yeah,
You
the
guys
next one.
skipped over the Nancy Pelosi thing a little bit, though. I mean, there is literally genocide happening in China right now. Like,
That's what I said.
oh, you did? Okay.
I said I got some work camps to show her that would beg to differ because the Urdu tribes are being held.
It's wild.
But
It's
that's
fucking wild.
not, that's not below my line, but that's below her line.
That's the
All right,
funniest clip
Pete.
ever.
Next story.
Next story is mine. So there's this story about Facebook that's been going around the Twitterverse. You know, basically, Big Brother Meta has been passing along private messages to police. So the story specifically is that Facebook gave Nebraska police a teen's Facebook DMs so that they could prosecute her for having an abortion. Now, separate from the abortion issue, people are like shocked about this, or they seem to be on Twitter saying like, oh my God, you know, fuck Facebook, like what's going on? But if you read through the story, this is something that has been happening for many years and nobody should be surprised about. What happened was the police went to Facebook, a social media company, and they were like, hey, we have a warrant. And Facebook was like, no problem, bro. And they just gave them all the information. That happens every day for all sorts of shit. So the takeaway here is, as always, do not trust systems that you do not have control over. And anything that you say in your, whether it's Facebook DMs or Twitter DMs or Instagram DMs, those are all available to police if they have a warrant, and probably even if they don't. So pursue systems that allow you to safely and privately, communicate with your friends and family and people that you care about, because even if something is legal today, it may be deemed illegal or you're a bad person tomorrow, and then those records potentially exist forever. Privacy is a human right. It is not something that we should have to justify. Unfortunately, we do, but we all got to stand strong.
Yeah, P, and to hammer home this point, I know for the longest time there were some that were considered better actors. Like I know Apple for the longest time was like more vigilant than other tech platforms about privacy. I know there was a case in 2016 or 2017 about a domestic terrorist that ultimately died, and they were trying to crack into his phone, and Apple refused the federal government and the FBI and the CIA access to this guy's phone. And they were very pissed about this. And then ultimately now they're updating their terms and services, even at the tail end of 2021 or 2022. And they're basically trying to comb through everyone's photos in the guise of protection of children in order to comb through to make sure that they can see all your photos in your phone to prevent, or I guess ones that are linked to the cloud, and to prevent child pornography is under the guise of what it is, but at the cost of everyone's privacy. Obviously, child pornography is horrible. Anyone that is doing it should be, at the full extent of the law should go after them, but in the extent of going after them and going all through their privacy is ridiculous. Go ahead, Q. Anything to add?
Nothing constructive, but I got something to add. For any of our under 18 viewers who may be strapped in these hard times, this idea crossed my Twitter sphere, and honestly, it's too funny to not
Where
share.
is this going?
Should we mute him? Should we mute him now?
Probably should.
I want to hear it.
If you're under 18 years old, feel free to rob. Feel free to rob anything and do it naked, because that security footage is now child pornography, which no one can watch. So,
That is so funny. That is so funny. Man.
I didn't know where you're going with that, and that was actually clever.
Yeah, I thought you were going to be like, start an OnlyFans. No,
no.
I love that idea. You go into a bank and
This
just,
is
take off all your
absolutely
clothes.
not life advice. So
Absolutely
don't
do
do
not.
this.
Come on, I'm serious.
Like,
This is not law advice. This is not financial advice. This is just not life.
What will actually happen is you will be tried as an adult and go to prison forever. But I just love the idea of somebody who's under 18 walking into a bank, and then some dude just like taking off all of his clothes. He's like 17 and a half and be like, give me all your money. And they're like, I guess we have to, and we can never take him to jail because he's a child and he's nude.
I'm just countersuing you. If you sue me for robbing, I'm countersuing you for distributing and sharing child pornography of me, and the damages that you have caused me psychologically and emotionally. I may never recover.
Someone must have already tried this. Come on.
Q's gonna, and people are gonna whip out their iPhones. He's like, I'm going after Apple as well.
He's like, it was me. I was the one who tried this when I was 17 and a half. Okay, let's keep going. You got the next story.
I want to talk about corruption. I want to talk about corporate greed. I talk a lot on this show about how inflation is caused by two forces, supply and demand. I've given my weighting of each of these components of inflation. What we don't talk a lot about, quite frankly, is corporate greed. I want to present an example of what I believe is true corporate greed. In the Inflation Reduction Act, there is an $8,000 tax credit for anyone who purchases electric vehicles. Some of those electric vehicles include Ford F-150s, Tesla, Rivian, the Volkswagen, IDF, very select few. Not every electric vehicle qualifies. So this was something interesting that happened yesterday. Ford announced that they were planning to bump up the price of its electric F-150 Lightning pickups by $6,000 to $8,500, citing a rise in material cost. In the same breath, Tesla increased prices on its electric vehicles up to $6,000 in June, although they didn't say why. I'm telling you, this just reads to me like it's these corporations saying, "Oh, there's a tax credit coming out. Well, let's keep that for ourselves." So I just call foul here. Reads like a shady, dirty deal. And I don't, quite frankly, like it. I don't think that there should be this tax credit to, like, mind you, I don't think the tax credit should be in the Inflation Reduction Act to begin with. I think it's stupid and superfluous. I think most electric vehicles at this point have become so cheap, and the class of people going to get them is a different class of people than the people who need certain rebates. And the fact that now the corporations have just gone and circumvented it and essentially put that in their own pockets pisses me off a little bit.
Yeah.
When you have corruption and base layer money, the corruption runs deep. And I wouldn't even be surprised, Q, if they paid the politicians to put in this tax credit and then they knew it because they wrote the law for them and sent it to their staffers. And then they just bumped up the prices that they're like, look, you're going to get $6,000 back. But they're just pocketing the free tax dollars off the lower and middle class, basically.
Yep. It's bullshit.
It is. All right. In other news, Robinhood was fined $30 million by the New York Department of Finance earlier this week for its crypto subsidiaries' significant anti-money laundering, cybersecurity, and consumer protection violations. It was also accused the company of lying about its compliance status. This isn't the first or last time I've sued. Robinhood will be in the headlines. Obviously, I know last year they were all the issues with stopping market volatility of GameStop and AMC. Actually, even just this week, they stopped the trading of both of those stocks in order to they claimed market volatility. So it's crazy. I'm not a big fan of Robinhood. I know I haven't checked and I have not used the platform in over a year and a half. But I know that they did, I think, allow people to self-custody their own Bitcoin, which is a step in the right direction after years of pestering. But I have not been able to verify that myself. P or Q, I don't know if you have anything else to add there.
Well, seeing as that was announced at B22, can confirm that is being offered by them. Hasn't been rolled out yet, TBD. I do know that the lady from Robinhood who made the announcement is now no longer at Robinhood. So worth noting, they have also laid off 23%, or said that they will lay off 23% of their workforce. So sorry, guys. I think the worst is yet to come for Robinhood, quite frankly. Although worth pointing out, completely separate to all of this, meme stocks, I guess, were having like a nice little week last week. So who knows? Maybe the layoffs have already started. Maybe retail traders are going to be entering the market very, very soon, very quickly. Remains to be seen.
Q, you got the next story?
I do, with a goldfish in my mouth. Inflation is in, and I was wrong. 8.5%. So we're down from the 9.1% that was given to us in June. However, 8.5 is the same level that we got, I believe, in, what was it, May? So 9.1, 8.6, down, and then 8.5. Whatever. A few months back, we got 8.5 already. Yeah, I was wrong. It's still going up, though. Like, we need to discuss that. This media narrative that, oh, inflation is down, we're good. Like, the Fed has got it right. That's horseshit. There's still 8.5% inflation. Like, gas here in Nashville, I was joking with friends last night at dinner. I was like, man, it feels nice to see gas at like $3.50 a gallon, which is what I was paying a year ago in California. But no, gas in California is still hovering around $5 a gallon. So don't sit right with me. I know that, there are always those people doing the calculations of like, what is the real GDP or what is the real inflation number? I know that last month we tried to look up this website and it was just taken down, but I do believe that it still hovers in double digits and probably closer to 20 than 10%. So it's going to get a lot worse. I don't think that the worst is yet behind us. This is just 1 month. If we look back in a couple more months and 9.1 was peak inflation, okay. Personally, not willing to make that call yet. After just a 1 month decline, we've already seen a little 1 month decline and then a shooting up to new highs. I will admit, like, I'm surprised. I thought that we would see something higher, just given the fact that oil prices from July of 2021 sat around $70 a barrel. And then now you have oil prices still above 90, sometimes breaking below $90 a barrel right now in August. So I don't know. What are your guys' initial thoughts hearing the inflation read?
I mean, I sound like a broken record, but these statistics are heavily manufactured and massaged. So they're going to massage them as much as they possibly can every time they possibly can. So I'm kind of at this point where I just feel super jaded and I'm not particularly surprised by this at all. Chris, what do you think?
8.5 is, while it is down from what it was, is still not low by any means. I mean, if you're using the rule of 72, it's like an accounting or investing principle that you take whatever your investment is, the percent returns, and you divide it by 72. That's still, long story short, it's like within 10 years, you lose your purchasing power, gets cut in half. So it was even less than it. I think it's like 8 years. So running this hot in inflation is really bad. And I think while it's crippling the middle and lower class, we're never going to see prices go like lower. Like these are the elevated prices they're going to be at. Like next year, if the prices were to remain the same, it would be zero. I also saw reports that they were saying, or Biden, and then also his press secretary said, we saw 0% inflation, which I didn't have enough time to look into. But they were like, yeah, we saw 0% inflation for the month of July. I was like, what are they talking about? What do you mean 0% inflation? It was absurd.
You know what? That is a great fucking point. Regardless of the fact that this is a manipulated statistic, it is still acknowledging that we are seeing massive inflation. And to cast it as anything other than this is fucking crazy is, to your point, Q, just media narrative spin.
Yeah, like I'm trying to get to the bottom of how the media is trying to defend the Biden faux pas and the press secretaries. Just complete, like, I thought we had the worst press secretaries in the Trump years, but like, my God, is Biden giving Trump a run for his money with his picks there? Let him spin all they want. It doesn't, like, they won't admit we're in a recession. They'll continue to show you the statistic that makes them look like what they're doing makes sense, so that they can continue to make the decisions on your and my behalf when they know less than what you and I know and understand. I've said it before and I know how crazy I sound, but I am far more qualified than Jerome Powell to make some of these decisions that he's somehow making when I never decided that I wanted Jerome Powell making those decisions for me. Just my own personal thoughts and feelings, because this is fucking stupid.
So we got 5 minutes here before Sam gets here. What else do you guys want to touch on? Anything else in your world?
Ooh. I want to pick up the story from yesterday where like we were like kind of like, Kathy Wood fucked up her Coinbase trade. Well, guess what? She did it because Coinbase just got wrecked for another 10%. Yesterday off of their earnings report, they missed revenue by 59%.
Oh man, that's not even close.
Like bad.
That is fucking wild.
I bet. So, and we've seen lately, like other exchanges are seeing blood in the water. Like obviously, like Binance is running a promotion of free trades for Bitcoin. It was only through the end of September, I believe, and a bunch of other exchanges are just going. They're seeing the jugular. Are they the first and only publicly listed exchange? I know obviously Binance and other ones operate in Europe and stuff. Are they the only publicly listed?
Technically, as far as like if you wanted to find an exchange as like a marketplace for multiple cryptocurrencies to be purchased and sold, I would argue that if it's just, it can be any cryptocurrency, that Block Square, technically with Cash App, was there. But to your point, even Block cited the decrease in interest in purchasing Bitcoin on their platform, as well as decrease in Bitcoin's price as far as what was causing their decline in their company. So it's being felt all around the industry right now. It remains to be seen, I think, if, a little mini bull market, whatever this price upturn looks like, how these companies and businesses handle it. But I think Coinbase is a lot more hot water than they're willing to let on, and they're going to have a lot more challenges up ahead that will continue to suppress this price lower and lower.
I got to pull the clips at a later date, but Q, I know when we were talking about this was back in, I guess, was it January, or when did Coinbase go public? I forget what it was. April. I know we were talking back then. We were like, oh, this is going to be like a peak for them. Like, they're doing it at the exact right time. Like, they hit 1.8 billion in revenue that quarter and stuff, and it's like it's only going to get less. It's not a sustainable business model, and I don't always say like they're dumping on retail, but that's basically what a lot of their long-term investors or people were getting into the IPO were doing.
Their whole business model has been built on, let's bring on this cryptocurrency that we'll get a pre-mined share of, dump it on our own retail users. And they took that business model and then reapplied it to the public market and literally said, you think Coinbase is dope? Cool. You could buy a share of Coinbase. Little did they know that everyone was like, fuck, this is a dumpster fire. I don't know why people like us. Let's just sell it and people will buy it and we'll be rich. Like, they literally rug pulled. I mean, I'd say this was the first time they rug pulled a security on users, but they list Ethereum and other shit on there. So is Vitalik going to come kill me now? Is my head going to get chopped off?
The World Economic Forum might be a proxy to come after you, Q.
I'm not losing sleep over that.
You're scared of Vitalik compared to the World Economic Forum?
I'm not afraid of Vitalik. He just creeps me out. Like, he's the type that I think is gonna like show up to my bedroom and just like watch me sleep.
Q, I love you, buddy, but you cannot eat live on mic. All I can hear is like, and then when you're talking, it's like,
it just tastes so good.
Yeah, get that shit out of your mouth.
All right, fair. Sorry, guys. Sorry, you guys had to hear me chew on some Pepperidge
on
Farms.
high def. Yeah, super high def mic. No way. I know I keep dragging us back to this. I want to talk more about Pelosi. I just cannot get over that fucking quote. Like, why do we think she is saying that? I mean, separate from the fact that she's putting her weight completely behind China's, one China policy. So again, this is they're reinforcing the idea of like, the US is not going to step in and protect Taiwan. Taiwan is totally on its own. China is totally right in whatever the fuck they want to do there, which is crazy to me. But more than that, like, what do we think her justification for making that statement is? Not the Taiwan one, although you can talk about that too if you want. I'm more interested in why she would say it's one of the freest societies in the world.
I think she's like I could take this first if you want. I think she's like back and forth because she said, I will not be like told what to do by China. Then about going to Taiwan. Then she goes to Taiwan. Then she comes back and then she's like, hey, it's the freest place in the world. We have good relationships with them, basically. Like, I think it's, I don't know, it's trying to be like poking the bear, but still like trying to eat your cake and have it too.
I think there's also something that's gotten lost in the narrative, and we've seen a lot of politicians, especially on the left, coming out and saying they support a one China policy. And people are like up in arms over this. This isn't this isn't Biden made it up. The one China policy has been around for quite some time now. I believe it dates as far back as like the 70s. So this isn't like a new narrative from DC per se. I think ultimately, to your point, like, I think Nancy Pelosi almost felt like by going to Taiwan, like, she was actually far safer, and she believed she was safer than anyone trying to make it out to seem, just because it's like, it's a U.S. diplomat that has never come out aggressively against China. There are other U.S. diplomats that have come out and reprimanded China in the past, but Pelosi has never done that. And I think there is this idea that the sheer act of going to Taiwan would upset them when in fact, like, we're just making assumptions on what the conversations are. And I'll make another assumption on the other side of the coin, which is Pelosi went to Taiwan to literally tell them, like, shut the fuck up. China's your overlord. Like, we don't know if she said that. We don't know if Pelosi went there and said, everything you guys do is great. We support you if China gets a great, like, we don't know where everything is just speculative. So I just think it's not fair to speculate on only one side of it and ignore this other potential side, which is that she actually is like very pro China and like went to Taiwan to almost tell them to like get back in line. So that's just something that I think we're ignoring a little bit here. The one China policy has been around for decades now. So that's just my 2 cents there.
All right. Well, we got to talk about Bitcoin Amsterdam. If you have not already got your tickets, do so. It is going to be a phenomenal experience. You can use code BMLive to save 10%. Don't you even do it, Q. I see you bring that little fucking goldfish in your mouth. Don't you fucking do it. If you have not already got I keep wanting to call it an episode, but an edition of the censorship resistance issue, you should definitely do it. It is also awesome. We will be right back after this commercial. Q will not put that goldfish in his mouth, and then we will have our guest to talk about CPI, inflation, and everything in between. Let's cut to commercial. Roll the tape.
Welcome back, and thank you for sticking through those commercial breaks. I am excited to introduce our guest for today is none other than friend of the show, Sam Callahan. Sam, welcome back to the show, buddy. How are you doing?
What's up, fellas? Thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
I also realized I did not give an intro for those who do not know who Sam is. A, you're doing Bitcoin Twitter wrong. B, Sam works over at Swan Bitcoin as a Bitcoin analyst. How else would you describe yourself other than the voice of Corey Klippstein?
Well, Corey's his own man, so I don't know if we'd say that, but I'm a Bitcoin analyst, man. So I'm a thread boy. I'm always doing analyst, writing a lot. I do a lot of the research at Swan, so a lot of the shows I'm kind of working in the background doing research for them, and then I do a lot of writing for our private clients, and I enjoy it, man. So that's kind of what I do.
Well, I want to start off very simply asking you, what is your definition of a recession? Because at this point, I have no idea what a recession even is.
Man, that's a good question. My definition of a recession is probably just in general an economic contraction. So you'd have slowing growth, job losses, pretty much typical things that you would see. I think I also consider a recession from a more economic behavioral standpoint of people starting to tighten their spending, getting worried about their finances at home. And so you have this shift in consumer behavior, which leads to further depreciation in asset prices, as well as decreased economic activity, which leads to more job losses. So it's kind of like this cycle that happens. And so traditionally it was 2 consecutive cycles of negative GDP growth, or 2 consecutive quarters, excuse me. But they just changed that on us. So I think it is important to look at multiple metrics when you're considering whether we're in an economic recession or not. But certainly growth is an important factor. And we are in currently, as traditionally defined, a economic contraction. So that's kind of what I would say.
If only we can get you to maybe say this publicly so that the world can finally hear it. Who knows? I want to. You brought up an excellent thread last week, and you bring up the jobs reports here. Can you talk a little bit about this thread? What you're paying attention to in jobs numbers? Like, what is the jobs report that you're paying attention to? Because there are so many different employment numbers that get thrown into our faces.
Yeah, and I think that's actually the way to do it. I think you need to take like a holistic approach and look at all the different job metrics. Now, what you'll hear lately is the payrolls number that really beat a lot of estimations last Friday. It's what you're going to hear the White House talking about. It's what you're going to hear the Fed talking about, because it was a really good number. But if you look at all of the different measures of employment, it shows a weaker labor market than maybe what the payrolls numbers suggest. And so when I look at the labor market and the data that comes from it, I look pretty deeply into how these numbers are derived. And so the thread was really looking at how the payrolls and the unemployment rate are measured and how they come to be. And they're really based on these surveys. And I think there's a lot of problems with how the data is derived and how the numbers are calculated. And it leaves a lot of leeway for these officials to do a lot of monkey business in the background to basically pump these numbers up when they want to, and also pump them down when they want to. And so it can be easily manipulated because of these adjustments to their statistical models that are really nebulous. And so that's kind of what I look at in the labor. We can go into more detail, but
No, let's go down this rabbit hole if you'll entertain us. I mean, one of the things that I like to pay attention to is the growth or loss of jobs in the retail sector, as well as white collar employment. And to me, seeing a decline in white collar employment while an increase in blue collar jobs, as well as retail and hospitality jobs, like that signals to me that there is a turnover and churn in employment that is driving wages lower, and in turn bad for the economy. Am I crazy? What are your thoughts on just that dynamic there?
no, I think that's right. I think you have to consider like who's actually on the ground doing a lot of the economic activity instead of pushing paper in these white collar jobs. Now, in terms of what's been going on lately, since March, there's been a huge divergence between a lot of these labor market metrics, and the payrolls has been indicating that jobs have been created every single month up and to the right. While as these other metrics like labor force participation rate or the household survey, which is another survey of unemployment, they're showing the opposite. They're showing basically flatlining and even decreases in jobs. And so these two metrics are both supposed to measure employment within the economy, but they're coming out with completely different things. So basically, which one's telling the true story, right? And so when you look into these payrolls specifically, which it came out at 528,000 jobs were created last month. And so it beat all these kinds of expectations. But when you look at the survey, it's based off 161,000 businesses. And it basically tries to guess how many jobs were created and how many of their payrolls increased. Now, what people don't realize is there's this adjustment called the birth-death factor. And the birth-death factor tries to guess how many jobs were created or destroyed in the last 30 days by new businesses or businesses that closed. And the way it kind of guesstimates this is it looks at previous year's tax filings. And if you just think about how crazy that is because of how rapidly changing economic conditions are, they calculate this adjustment by looking at previous years and basically say, oh, okay, last June in 2021, we had this many jobs created by new businesses. So this year, it must be similar around that. And of course, they revise it later on when they actually get the corporate tax filings from this year. They usually revise it 9 months later. And so they'll come back and they'll revise the number back down to what was actually accurate at the time. But they use the forecast number now to pump the payrolls number up. And so this last adjustment of the birth death factor, which I would call complete bullshit, it was the sixth highest in the last 20 years. And the April one was the second highest adjustment in the last 20 years. And so we're led to believe that new businesses were created in the last 30 months in this macroeconomic environment, and 309,000 jobs were created from these new businesses that are completely phantom, made up, guessed by these statistical models, when in reality, we're seeing a lot different picture on the ground. We're seeing increased news of layoffs seemingly every day. And so when the data doesn't seem to match what your eyes and ears are hearing and seeing on the ground, you shouldn't question your instincts and your gut. You should question the quality of the data. And this adjustment, if you take out the 309,000 jobs that were created from this adjustment and added to the payrolls number, you would get a number much closer to the household number. And so all these people read this headline number and say, oh, it's great, we're not in a recession, look at all these jobs. But they don't consider how these surveys are derived and how they're constructed, and these questionable adjustments. And just one more thing about this birth death factor. In periods of where the business cycle is turning and we're kind of entering a recession, that's when this birth death factor is really doesn't capture what's actually happening, because it usually overestimates how many jobs are being created and underestimates how many businesses are going out of business. And so it typically overestimates the jobs when we're entering a recession. And this is historically what's been shown since it's been implemented some 20 years ago. And so that's kind of the big thing, is like very important to understand. Look past the headline number and understand that there's a lot of funny business going around with how these numbers are derived. And these officials can basically pull out these adjustments out of thin air and push the narrative that they want. And what they wanted to push was that the economy is not in a recession, that it's stronger as the Fed tries to navigate a soft landing. And so that's kind of what I was looking at in this thread.
I think the last part of that is so important. The fact that, historically speaking, this number does a really bad job of in the moment registering a recession, because it literally is not designed to do that. It would, in theory, if it was just, it will continue to progress higher because the economy looked like it was going higher until it eventually falls off. This is a whole year behind the curve. So this number feels almost irrelevant. And it's funny that this is something that they still propel forward to pay attention to. Can we talk a little bit just about the general unemployment number and like the initial jobless claims? Because we're starting to see some changes in those, but what is their relevance and importance, if any, in the work and research you're doing?
Well, those are more concurrent, where they get read every week, the initial jobless claims, and they bottom in March. And the last JOLTS job openings, which has been kind of creeping up over the last several months, it just came out in June. It dropped off very steeply, so we're starting to see weakness there. And if we go back to that birth death factor for a second, like small business optimism and sentiment is currently at 48 years lows. And their main problem is with inflation, and inflation started to eat into their profit margins. And it really makes sense logically. I mean, labor costs are also the highest since the early 80s because workers are demanding more wages, and labor costs are the greatest cost for businesses. And so you can see why it's more likely that new businesses are laying off people, or businesses in general are laying off people and not hiring people. And that's like literally just think more outside the numbers and just like what you're experiencing and seeing on the ground. People are kind of struggling. And then when you also dig, just like what I look at in terms of the job numbers too, is like digging into more of the data, where most of these jobs that were created were part-time jobs and multiple jobs. And they weren't full-time. Actually, the full-time number went down, whereas the multiple jobs and part-time jobs consisted of most of those 528,000 jobs as part of the payroll number. And so what that tells me is that people are struggling with their current salary to keep up with the cost of living. And they're resorting to multiple jobs and part-time jobs. And so to me, it's not as good as it kind of seems on the surface. And so those are like the things that you have to consider of taking a holistic approach of when you look at any of these labor markets. It's really silly to look at one survey number and one headline survey number and think this is really great. Actually, like if it's not a lie if you believe it. So if you believe that headline number, you're like, oh, we're not struggling right now. We're not in a recession. Business is great. Small businesses aren't at the lowest optimism levels in almost 50 years. Like it just doesn't really match. And so I think that's just kind of an important thing to do when you're ever looking at these economic data that are pushed by, the Bureau of Labor Statistics. It's a very indirect way.
Dude, seriously, I want to live in that reality where like everything is fine and dandy, because it must be nice. What about, what does the birth death ratio look like in the context of rising rates? Like what has it done historically as rates go up versus when rates are being suppressed or brought down?
Well, I don't think that there's any, again, it's pulled out of thin air. So it's literally these officials can do what they want. For instance, in April it was 349 jobs, and the next month it was minus 15. And it just kind of fluctuates. I actually haven't looked into the relationship between interest rates and this specific adjustment of this survey, so can't really speak to it. But when I looked through the data and I was picking through, like seeing all of them over the last 20 years, it seems super random, which is what you would expect, because it is a random ass adjustment that they just kind of throw in there. And it's easily manipulated. So I'm not sure exactly the relationship. Maybe it's something I can look into, actually.
Cool. I did definitely expect to see my name as a co-contributor for giving you the idea for that.
Yeah.
Full of shit.
A nice chart.
Do you feel like talking about Pelosi a little bit with us? Would you entertain that conversation?
Yeah, man, I'll talk about anything with you guys.
Because we really upset P this morning watching this video of Nancy Pelosi just essentially talking about how wonderful, great, and peaceful China is, and how like it's the freest country in the world, which is a newsflash to me.
Fucking blew my mind. Like, I mean, just the stance that the U.S. has taken, which is like, Taiwan, go fuck yourselves. That is very surprising to me, given the world that we live in and the 5 and 7 nanometer chip shortages that are happening everywhere. So strategically, it seems crazy. Although I guess I understand it, but disappointing. But then her statements specifically, I don't know if you've seen the talk she just gave, but she basically says verbatim, China is one of the freest countries in the world, and it's totally insane.
I did see that, man. I was baffled. By it. I mean, what can you say? I mean, we all know China and all the issues that in terms of freedom that they have there, they're basically just consistently surveilled and told what to do. Like I saw clips of what it's like in COVID there, where it's like you test and then you're just in this bubble and you can't go anywhere. It's like checkpoints everywhere you try to go in terms of public transportation. You got social credit system scoring. I don't know what kind of freedom that Pelosi believes in or thinks is free, but China to me is the far end of the spectrum in terms of anti-freedom, and I think a lot of people would agree with me. So I don't know what their agenda is. To me, I always think about like the gerontocracy. I think these old people, like, for the love of God, please retire. Like, you're doing a terrible job at running our country, and you should be playing with your grandkids and drinking iced tea and playing bingo and just chilling out. Like, you're 85 years old. Like, please retire. Thank you for your service. So that was my immediately what I thought when I saw that clip. It's just like another example of very out of touch and doesn't really understand the moving parts of what's going on in the world. And I think you can extrapolate that out to most world leaders today. I mean, the only ones that seem to be any kind of intelligent whatsoever, I mean, admittedly, it seems to be Putin and maybe the French guy, Macron. He seems to be the only two that like actually think strategically. And I'm not like a backer of Putin or anything, but it just seems like our politicians are so incompetent and don't really think through what they say, or they're just drunk.
Why not both?
Yeah.
So I want to throw a number out at the two of you guys just to really paint a picture of the geriatrics that have way too much power. There are 166 million Americans who are under the age of 40. And Congress is made up in large part by people who are far, far, far older than the age of 40. In fact, it's about 95% are over the age of 40. Like, I'll give you the answer to the question I want to ask, but like term limits are the answer to how do we get them to like not spend a whole career in DC just getting rich on ourselves, but like any other ideas? How do we start this revolution? How do we get Nancy Pelosi to just go like kick rocks? And honestly, Mitch McConnell too, for that matter, like cut from the same cloth.
Yeah, term limits is the obvious answer, and I think what we need is, I think we need young people to get into office. To be honest with you, young people who are intelligent, who would actually want to run for like a political position. I think we're gonna have to like infiltrate in order to get those term limits. I think both of those would be really important. Unfortunately, most people who go into politics, like, it seems, who wants to do that? Like, if you're smart, like, why the hell would you want to go into politics? So there's a little conundrum there. But I think more and more people are starting to understand the importance of that. And like, we can't just leave it up to these people who are incompetent, who are bought and corrupt to lead our nation and our democracy. So I think you're starting to see more interesting candidates come across. Starting to see things like, I don't support Andrew Yang, but they're creating a third party, which I'm all for. I think the two-party system is very flawed and leads to division. And so just the fact that that's happening, you see in a few Bitcoiners starting to run too, like Bruce Fenton is running and a few others. So I think you're going to start to see a shift in people being more proactive about, taking the reins and dictating policy, and hopefully some adults can come back into the political realm, because right now it's just a mess, right? So that's kind of my takeaway there.
P, I don't know if you wanted to chime in here, but I can keep this rabbit hole.
No, let's go. I'm just enjoying. I'm ready to pounce as soon as something strikes me. But
I'm going to keep going down this rabbit hole for a second, because, like, again, one thing that I've very loudly continued to pound this drum, and I will continue to do it, is I actually almost disagree in the notion that, like, it's not a good thing for Bitcoiners to necessarily run for public office. I think it's great for us to have conversations with these people, but I worry that unfortunately they will just get corrupted by DC, and people with really good intentions or with seemingly great intentions may go in and just see all the power and kind of get corrupted by it. We've seen politicians come out and say something about Bitcoin, and it's just that's it. They just say something about Bitcoin. Like earlier today, we were having a conversation about, what was it, Chris, South Carolina? Their treasury like sent out a tweet being like, "Oh yeah, Bitcoin, thumbs up." And it's just like, no, like they're just trying to cater to us. Like they're trying to cater to an audience and get our attention. And there's a lot of noise out of that space. So how do you try to separate the noise from the signal from DC when it comes to just Bitcoin stuff?
Yeah, I'm looking at some of these comments too, and I kind of agree with them, to be honest with you. Like, I've kind of shifted my thoughts a little bit. Like, I used to think like Bitcoin doesn't need government, Bitcoin doesn't need politics, which is there's some truth to that. And you see a lot of these politicians just kind of trying to create a new angle to get more voters by being pro Bitcoin, and then they go to shitcoinery, and then they actually don't understand Bitcoin. They're just trying to use its brand to basically come off as, supportive of new technologies as well as like the new thing, right? They're like, oh, I'm a Bitcoiner, and they're just trying to get votes. So it's really hard to tell like who's actually authentic. But I think over time you can kind of just read people, especially like in terms of like people like Cynthia Lummis, who have shown that she actually understands Bitcoin and the Bitcoin ethos. Again, she put out a bill that I don't agree with a lot of what's in it, but would I rather have her writing the bill than one of these other politicians? Like probably. Like she seems at least like she understands a little bit about what's going on in terms of the central banking system, in terms of the debt, in terms of some of these really, really big issues that are plaguing our future. And so I think it's just kind of like reading somebody and not buying their shit at first and making them prove it. So it's proof of work, essentially. So they need to show me over a long period of time that they mean what they say. And they're not just like trying to cater to a new voting base. And so it's proof of work, basically.
Is there a politician that you think, who is like the number one politician that you think is not pro, but just good for Bitcoin? And who's the number one in your power rankings for who is bad for Bitcoin?
Dude, I just hate all politicians. But
this is why I prefaced by saying, like, would you entertain this conversation?
I feel like this entire conversation until now has been you trying not to say that, and then you're finally just like, I can't do it anymore. I just want to come clean.
Look, I'll give you the out, and you can just say Lummis.
No, well, I'll say Lummis. Yeah, like I mean, she like I said, I think she's got connections to Will Cole over at Unchained. I think they're in her ear. I think she's well educated on the subject. She's spoken about it intelligently, and I think she's by far the furthest. Tom Emmers impressed me. I forgot his other name. I forgot the other one, but some of them have spoken out about CBDCs, which I do a lot of research about that, and I think it's a really important issue. And so they've spoken out about CBDCs, which is, 1% of all politicians probably even know what the hell those things are, but they've taken a really strong stance against that. So those are probably like my favorites. I'm trying to think of the other guy. He like retweeted me once, but I think he's in the House of Representatives. I can't remember who he is. But the ones that are, sorry, go on.
I was just going to point out, so for any politicians listening, to end up on Sam's good list, all you need to do is shoot him a retweet.
Yeah. If I'm shitting on the Bank of International Settlements and they retweet that, like that is kind of a win in my book. Like
absolutely
talking shit against the IMF and Biz, and one of a sitting politician retweets that. I'm all for that.
It's a win-win.
So those are my pro ones, I guess. If I had to pick one, the worst ones seem to be Elizabeth Warren, who just seems so misguided and just corrupted almost. I just wonder what her intentions are, like who's paying her, and she's the worst because she just makes assumptions and then takes a hard stance and then writes letters to Fidelity for like including Bitcoin in 401k plans, and then it's so ignorant. All of her takes are super ignorant, and so she's been annoying lately. So and then there's that guy from California who's like very strong anti-Bitcoin. I think his name's like Ron something.
Brad Sherman.
That's it.
The worst.
That guy's just the worst. And so those are probably my two worst ones.
So here's an interesting thing. I've been on a big kick of opensecrets.org, which is essentially will tell you who donated how much to what politician. Interestingly, Elizabeth Warren's top donor is the University of California, so the UC school system. Pro educators, pro teachers, kind of makes sense. I don't know what MJ for Texas is. Then you got Google, some foundation, another foundation, Democracy Engine, Harvard, UMD College Park. She gets a lot of donations from the education space, it seems like. She also gets donations from University of Washington, City University of New York, State University of New York, California State University. Like, at no point is any Massachusetts educational institution, with the exception of Harvard, on this list. Really makes you wonder.
Yeah.
Quite frankly, also to answer your question, Sam, of like who's paying her, giving her money, I was actually kind of expecting to see more banks on this list, and I'm kind of surprised that they're not.
Yeah, me too,
But we,
actually. I mean, she's anti-Bitcoin. Does she not understand? Like, it's almost like she's pro central banks. Then that's how I see it, at least.
well, she
And
comes from like the banking world.
yeah, she seems
But
just like super bought, like I said, and kind of annoying because she'll write like a letter, and her and these other senators will write it, and it'll be full of misinformation, and they'll quote the Ditch Economist about the energy, and those his model is completely flawed. It's been completely debunked. Like, for instance, when China banned 50% of the hash rate, the electricity consumption index that the Ditch Economist uses, it went up during that period. So just think about that. Like, that's how flawed that metric is. And that's what's always referred to. That's the one that looks at, Bitcoin transactions somehow creating energy footprint or carbon footprint, the size of Sweden or whatever the hell thing. It's completely flawed, doesn't understand how Bitcoin works. And then it's almost embarrassing that they include this flawed model every single time it's referenced. And then people from the industry respond with the letters point by point. It's like Brandolini's law. So it takes them a lot longer to refute their stupid ideas, but they write those letters and you just don't hear anything from them. Like, they don't even recognize that rebuttal exists. And then they just continue to write another letter with the same misinformation, referencing the same flawed models. And so that's when you think about, this isn't about truth. This is about agenda.
I want to shift over to CPI, unless there's anything else we want to hammer home. Sam, I know you love talking politics, so is there any final points here before I don't ask any more political questions today?
Well, the one thing I'll say is that the one thing that politics, I think, could do is just delay Bitcoin's adoption. I don't think it can do anything to really stop it. I think the game theory and Bitcoin will just continue to seep into the mind share. But they can make things hard for the short term. But that's kind of what I would say. Is like, Bitcoin doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really matter for Bitcoin. TikTok next block.
Love it. Love it. On the topic of... Go ahead.
Who is it that said just a super like positive quote? It was something like the world will not be free until the last politician is strangled with the entrails of the last priest, or something like that. Who said that?
I don't know.
It was one of the Teletubbies. It was one of the Teletubbies. Got it. All right. Sorry, Q. Let's keep going.
Moving on to more government, I guess, misinformation, if you will. I asked Sam at the very beginning, what is your definition of a recession? Well, we have the new CPI numbers. 8.5% inflation, which is down from last month's reading of 9.1 year over year, but still 8.5% inflation. That's my initial thought. Sam, what are your initial thoughts when you saw the CPI numbers?
I kind of expected it. I mean, things were running really hot, and you started to see energy prices start to fall. The price of oil is falling, gasoline's falling. So that's what kind of led a lot of these decreases in prices. And so it was expected, but I mean, it's encouraging. I think inflation's really harmful for a lot of people, especially the poorest amongst us. So I was encouraged by it. And in terms of the Fed, I mean, they have to be happy about it. It was the largest month-over-month change since April 2020. So you got to think about the rate of change when you think about this. Yes, it's at 8.5% still, and it's absolutely nuts that people are happy about that. But it could be 9.5%, right? So it's a positive direction. Do I think it's peaked? I'm very hesitant to say that, because I think a lot of this is structural, and tomorrow something could happen geopolitically, and it could cause all kinds of issues. So But right now, it could be the Fed might kind of pump the brakes a little bit because obviously they talked about how important inflation was, getting inflation under control. Now the Fed futures are estimating that they'll do a 50 bips cut instead of a 75 bips, which before this inflation print, that was the big, everyone thought it would be a 75 bips rate hike next September. And so it's encouraging, but it kind of goes back to the labor data. Like obviously everyone talks about CPI, how much bullshit that is. It's just another metric that can be manipulated. And the perfect example of that is the owner's equivalent rent, which measures the shelter component of the CPI and makes up 30% of the weighting of the CPI. And the owner's equivalent rent.
Can you explain that in a little bit more detail? How is that calculated?
The owner's equivalent rent is a very indirect measurement of basically rent. It looks at the owners and it basically just tries to guesstimate using a couple different factors or inputs of what the rent increases have been for the owners. So like how much they charge for the rent instead of how much the renters are actually experiencing on the ground. And when you look at Redfin or Zillow, some of these other measurements of rent, it estimates that rent is increased on average 14% year over year, not 5.3%. So it's an absolute joke. It underestimates the shelter component, and it's the largest weighting of the CPI.
But Sam, why would they do that? Why would they not be interested in having like a super accurate measure of, inflation?
It's a great question, and this isn't people have, again, just like the birth death factor in the payroll survey, people have been talking about how silly the owner's equivalent rent is in the CPI basket for decades. I mean, it just doesn't accurately. If you look at the Case-Shiller price index, which is just a measure of, tries to measure average house prices against the owner equivalent rent, they should probably track each other pretty closely, right? But you don't see that. Like, for instance, in 2008 or 2007, when house prices were crashing, the owner's equivalent rent was just kind of like barely rolling over. Obviously, you would think it would crash over. Similar now, the Case-Shiller price index for housing hit an all-time high in May. But you're seeing the owner's equivalent rent just kind of staying flat. And so they basically neuter the changes in housing. And then my thing about the CPI too is the Fed looks at the core PCE, not the headline CPI. A lot of the media focuses on the headline CPI, but the Fed looks at the core PCE or the core CPI, but mostly the core PCE. And that takes out food and energy. And Jerome Powell says like, yeah, but we look at the core PCE because that's a more accurate measure for how people are feeling on the ground. And I'm like, please explain that to me, because if you take out food and energy, which is most people's essential, living, what they have to spend money on, and you take that out, which they've both been at crazy highs over year, both the food prices and the fuel prices. How is that more accurate measured how people are feeling on the ground? It's just the Fed is completely stuck in its models. It is completely disconnected from the real world. And it's the groupthink that has been plaguing that institution for decades. And so they think that the core PCE is better. That's coming out soon. The core CPI also was a good number. It dropped below estimates, but it just goes to show you, like, you have to look into how these numbers are calculated, all of them, because a lot of them there's funny business. There's funny business going on.
I want to break this down because, there's also the fact that oil has been the largest component of driving inflation higher with the largest amount of gains. But we don't see the housing market cooling down. We're getting reports that rent has only continued to go higher all over the place. Food prices are slowly starting to creep up as well. Like, are we seeing the effects of like the high oil now trickle into other sectors, or are we going to see a slowdown in all of these prices? Because the only way we get deflation is not if we get 6% inflation reads next month. It's if we get negative inflation reads. Like, let me rephrase. Do you think getting to a point of deflation is realistic in the future for America?
Oh yeah, I mean you've seen that in the past. It could flip negative pretty quickly because I think in markets it's just yeah, steps on the way up and escalators on the way down. Same thing can happen when you have a huge deflationary impulse. And you have to understand that it's important to recognize that CPI is a backward-looking metric and oil is a leading metric, and as well as housing. Both are leading indicators. And so I would actually argue that we're seeing a ton of weakness in the housing sector. So, last month, existing home sales declined for the 5th consecutive month, and it's down 21% year to date. So that's existing home sales. New home sales fell 8% month over month. It was estimated or expected to be 6%. So huge miss there. They're down 29% since January, and you're seeing a ton of weakness. The National Association of Realtor CEO basically said we're headed for a housing recession. And it's because housing is not affordable anymore. These mortgage payments with the aggressive interest rate hikes and the mortgage rates has made housing extremely unaffordable for these people. It's actually the most unaffordable housing has ever been. And that just can't last. That's not sustainable. So housing is a really good leading indicator for the business cycle. It's where most people's net worth are tied up. Once that rolls over, it typically leads a recession. And once housing starts to rebound at the bottom of a recession, it typically leads us out of a recession. And so right now, the last month and the last really 2 or 3 months, we've seen the housing sector start to roll over. And I think it's about time. It made no sense, right? It's just simply not affordable for these people. And people need to live in houses. And so according to Redfin, I think in the 25% of sellers cut their prices across 75% of the metro markets that they look at last month. So they're starting to cut their prices because people aren't buying them anymore. So demand's slowing. And so that's what I expect to happen with this housing market. It's a leading indicator. Same with oil. Oil, the high oil prices, sky high oil prices of the last 5 months have trickled on into these businesses and hurt their profits. And we're starting to see that now. But not now, oil's kind of falling off a cliff. So it's dropped under 90 yesterday. And it's starting, and that's also a leading indicator. So that's why people are saying, you can look at this one payrolls number and say we're not in a recession. You could look at the unemployment number and say we're not at a recession. But to me, all these other economic data points are pointing to that as I don't want to be the bearer of bad news or be bearish, but it's just not a good look. And honestly, I think we need it. So it's kind of like we need a recession to kind of clean up the excess and help out the people who don't own assets and make prices cheaper for them. And that's what recessions do. So
I want to also just throw out a couple other one fact and one question to follow up on just this real estate conversation. But Wells Fargo, which is the third largest mortgage lender in the country, laid off a significant portion of their home lending division earlier this year. And they continue to have layoffs as well. So that's not a sign that the housing market isn't, or at least mortgages are looking strong or viable investment. I do want to caveat though and kind of ask, we're still seeing houses sell for significant amounts higher than the asking price, which is not normal. I say normal because I buy and sell homes so often that I understand the inner workings of the real estate market to make such a bold claim like that. I was having a conversation at dinner again last night just about the idea of is our generation just never going to own a home? To which I say, yes, we will never own a home. Blackrock is going to be your landlord and you're going to be happy about the bugs you eat. Realistically, what is your expectation for real estate for our generation? Fuck these old people who've ruined it all. Let's talk our generation. How are we scheming to get a house here?
I mean,
P's generation really fucked us.
I think you're spot on with BlackRock. BlackRock just opened like the largest real estate fund ever to start buying up houses on the cheap in anticipation for a coming housing recession. So I think they see the writing on the wall right now, at least temporarily, for these housings as well. Honestly, with housing, I mean, Bitcoin, I think holding the right money will help you afford the assets you want in the future, what you need. Like I really think that the path to home ownership for a lot of these really young people are holding a better money like Bitcoin that can increase in purchasing power. And then you could perhaps, I know it's heresy, but sell some Bitcoin to buy a home.
He did not.
Yeah. Well, I guess you could take out a loan against the Bitcoin.
Corey, come get your boy. Come get your mans.
Real estate is kind of a shit coin sometimes. But you do need to live in a house. And if you wanted to buy a cool farm or something, get more self-sustainable, and if you're gonna sell Bitcoin, you might as well do it like a nice house with like a farm, and you could do these like live a nice life in the countryside. So it's not something I'm gonna do, but I'm just saying, like, I think that's a path to home ownership for these young people, as well as I guess they could just like invest in other things besides Bitcoin. But I don't really see the asymmetric opportunity elsewhere that Bitcoin can provide. And then home ownership. The one thing that this is going to do, it's going to bring families together, generations together, and people like they're already doing that with like young people living at home. So I think the people that are going to own homes as young people, it's going to come from inheritance, unfortunately. But probably most people.
Damn. So I'm never going to get a home. My dad told me once he was never
Well,
going to
do you hold Bitcoin, man?
Well,
are you bearish?
Well, clearly not enough. Now I have to calculate
like,
selling my Bitcoin.
I
that
mean,
was not part of the
if I have to
calculation
sell,
here.
like 1% of my stack to buy a nice house one day, I mean, it's gonna be nice.
Man, you must have a really big stack.
No, I'm just one sat's gonna be the amount of value packed into that, man.
Sam has finally admitted that he is one of the whales. So just know that about Sam Callahan.
Right. Bitcoin mortgage too. That's a good point. Ledin started the first Bitcoin mortgage in Canada, so you could do something like that.
I mean, we could do a fun little thought experiment, because I did not feel like I got an answer that actually, yeah, I kind of did, but like the entire real estate market in general, yeah, we will never own a home. The entire
You're just bearish. You're bearish on Bitcoin, man. It's okay.
I am. I'm going to ask a really bearish question. I will ask a bearish question because so real estate was designed to build off of this inflationary monetary system that we have. Like real estate's value goes up until it reaches a point where it's actually unattainable for those who are trying to start out, unlike the way it was 50 years ago. Why then, when we have these conversations around, well, eventually like all of the store of value money that's tied up in real estate will move over to Bitcoin, but there has to be a good value proposition. So the value proposition, in my opinion, has to be the real estate market has turned into a deflationary market. How do we make something deflationary? Introduce technology into it. What are the two components of real estate? The land itself and the manufacturing and building of the home. I know for certain the manufacturing side, that once 3D printing like really ramps up to the point where you have like livable things, like boom, you are manufacturing homes at a much faster pace than how long it took my dad to build the house that they live in now. The other side of that question though is, how do we make land much, like how does technology and land mesh to then make land deflationary? The idea that was brought up to me by CK was the fact that technology can and should make inhabitable land more desirable and habitable. I don't know. I'm trying to throw out some words that I don't really use, so fumbling a little bit. What are other ways, in your opinions, that we can create deflation in real estate? Because that's the only way we get to that point where Bitcoin is absorbing the store of value money. If you own one house, you don't care if the value of the house goes down. If you're able to afford that mortgage rate, you're going to keep paying it. You're not going to go park that money elsewhere. But it's those families that have 2, 3 people who have 8, 9 different properties. If the value proposition is no longer there where, hey, if I just hold this for 20 years, it'll go up. That may not be the case. Where's the next thing to go? Bitcoin. So how do we get there? I've kind of presented to the two of you.
Yeah, it's well, first I the 3D printing houses, yeah, that's really interesting idea.
I feel so bad
really
for my dad who's a contractor.
about
Like
that.
that's his career.
Yeah, just
No,
think
no,
about
wait,
this,
wait,
like,
wait.
huge 3D printing. Yeah,
I mean,
it's
I think it will be an important part of it, but I think we're a long, long way off from
Totally.
having like
Totally.
robots that can descend. I mean, like, and I feel like if that was going to be the case, we would still be like everybody would be living in like what are they? Not is it mobile homes? Like the things you just sort of like partition out.
Like that'll be the first iterations of it. Like you see all these like smaller homes, like Elon Musk touting like, oh yeah, I live in this like box that I can just like pay $5 million to move to wherever I want. Like you should just own one of these types of boxes too. Like that will be the first iteration of, oh, this one was built by a 3D printer. Like,
it
oh,
does
we
sound
created
kind
a
of
whole,
fiat.
Sounds super fiat.
Like,
Also,
you know,
Hammer
it's like the
saw-
architecture, the beauty. Is everyone just in these like stupid boxes and it looks like
Wait,
shit?
I mean, let's be real though. Houses are not like marvels of modern architecture. Like you go look at any modern house and it's like might as well like fall out of the sky. But
yeah, that's true.
I don't know, man. I walk around Nashville and I could tell the houses that are newer and older.
Oh,
And
absolutely.
I definitely like the newer ones. They don't look
no,
like
for
they're beat up
sure.
and destroyed.
For sure, but it's not like this house was made by an artisan who hand flourished like each
All right,
eve. It's,
You got to come to LA. You got to come to LA.
I mean,
Yeah,
houses are houses, bro.
pillars.
Well, so
marble
Chris is finally
structures.
admitting how rich he is because he's got fucking marble statues up in his house. So clearly we're doing it all wrong. And whatever Chris does is what we should all be doing. Which, by the way, Chris does own his home in Beep. We doxed you forever.
I will say, like, in terms of the deflation, like, so right now real estate's just used as a pseudo store value because the money is broken. And as Bitcoin comes into view with the deflationary nature, if you studied like when money dies and when they're all denominated in dollars, all these houses, all these mortgages, you should just see price deflation across the board as anything denominated in dollars just gets wiped out in value. And so anybody who holds Bitcoin, everything's going to get cheaper for them. And so I think that goes for houses, but it goes for land too. And then in terms of the land, the technology, Bitcoin is a technology, but it's only one technology, and it's going to mix with the confluence of game-changing technologies. It's going to be AI, machine learning, 3D printing, Bitcoin, all combining together to bring us forward with innovation in agriculture and all kinds of things like that. So that's kind of what I think about in terms of you better just not be denominating everything in dollars, including your mortgage, because again, in Weimar Germany or any of these hyperinflationary events, the people that stored their wealth in real estate, it just got wiped out. It just got completely wiped out because it was denominated in the currency that was failing. And so that's how I think it's going to play out. And that's why trying to make this bridge between Bitcoin now to try to prevent that from happening to a lot of good people is why I think we do what we do in terms of education.
Yeah, well said.
Am I unmuted? Am I still muted?
No, you're good.
Oh, sorry. I guess I was mouth breathing again. Sorry, guys. P, why is it that even after 150 years on Earth, you don't own a home?
Homes are expensive as fuck, man. Yeah, I like have always been. I've had this like atavistic terror around debt, which is to my significant detriment, right? We've talked about this before, but when I went to college, I got accepted to a number of like, well-known smaller universities. And I was like, no, I don't want to go to those because I don't want to take on any debt. And so I went to like a state school instead. And in retrospect, especially since like now, like, apparently fucking all student debt is going to be forgiven or some shit. That was a mistake. And I think it's the same thing around like mortgages. Like there are times, many times when, taking on a mortgage, it's like one of the best deals you can get, 30-year fixed rate mortgage. Like, come on, let's go. But yeah, I'd rather have Bitcoin.
Bitcoin Daddy said, like, why wouldn't you want to own dollar denominated debt? And he's kind of right. Like, I guess what I meant with that real estate was when people have their net worth tied in equity in that stuff, that's the people that get wiped out. If you have a giant mortgage and you paid like minimum amount of it and then the money dies, you basically just got like a house for free almost, if you just have a huge amount of debt. So that's a important distinction.
Ooh. So what you're saying is if you time your mortgage purchase right, and like just, the collapse of the dollar happens shortly after I close the deal for my mega mansion that in no way I can afford, like theoretically speaking, no one can collect those dollars because the dollar is worthless. And therefore this house, which we've agreed upon, I am the owner of.
Yeah.
I am the captain.
I mean, that's the perverse incentives of the current system is actually wants you to go into more debt. Like, even though it's irresponsible to get that $1 million home, if you timed it perfectly and then the money starts to devalue at a rapid pace, it's actually kind of smart. It's the same thing why it's not smart to pay off your student loans, really, even though it's the responsible thing to do historically.
Yes. Thank you. Someone gets it.
Well, it's the right thing to do historically. I'm not saying like everyone's unique, so just do whatever you want to do in terms of your own risk tolerance and stuff like that. But at the current inflation rate and where the dollar is likely headed, it's kind of silly to spend all your, disposable income and just put it towards paying down this massive debt that's likely going to get cheaper over time because of the dynamics of just the system. And that's the perverse system, because it should reward you for doing the right thing and paying back your debts. That's just what, like, if I lent you $100, Q, or whatever, it should reward me for paying you off sooner. Like I'm like, that's the right thing to do, pay back what you borrowed. But now it's the opposite. So yeah, it's a good point too. Credit score goes down when you paid off quickly. But yeah, anyway, that's how I see those things.
Cool. I'm going to quickly scheme how to continue to further destroy the fiat debt cycle by taking full advantage of it while it exists, which I think, quite frankly, everyone should be doing. I actually think if everyone aped in and like really pushed the limits of this fiat debt system to like the outer bounds, like it would implode upon itself. Shut up. Go away, Chris. Go away.
Chris, our producer, is putting in the chat, go back to college, Q, and just buy Bitcoin instead.
Dude.
He's not wrong. Sam, I want to ask, shifting topic slightly, I like to ask everyone, like, what are areas of Bitcoin that you are particularly excited about? What are some of the technological, cultural, educational resources that you are, that have got you excited right now?
Usually what gets me really excited always is just how having a money that you can save on the second and third order effects of what that means for society, to be able to save money and invest and not feel like you're on a hamster wheel and you have to be not only make the money through working, but then maintain the money by investing it correctly to fight inflation. What that means is that if you have a money that you can save in, you can start to focus your attention elsewhere and not have to worry about it being devalued. And so you don't have to be an expert in investing. You don't have to look at charts. You don't have to do these things. So it frees up your time to do what you want to do in terms of hobbies, in terms of arts. Like I do see this scenario that a long time down the road where Bitcoin will kind of bring in this Renaissance era, where people are more focused, and similar to the Renaissance period before when they had a stable form of money, it kind of allowed that to happen. And so to think about what that would look like with the technology we have as well, that gets me really excited from just like a more big picture thing. In terms of like the building that's been occurring in the current bear market, some of these things that recently came out, like Keat and Fediments and all these technologies that are going to make self-custody easier. Potentially, it's still kind of early days there. Light Network, I'm super excited about just the growth there. Anything that kind of adds functionality while maintaining the base layer, its consensus mechanism by preserving that, but then building on top of that in layers of functionality. That gets me really excited because it just shows that Bitcoin is software that will continuously upgrade and improve over time. And to see more innovation in anything that makes self-custody easier, that makes medium of exchange easier, that makes the UX UI easier for individuals. That's the stuff that gets me excited, and I think it's what you should be focusing on instead of just looking at the price, because it's quite on the edge of technological innovation, I think so.
I'll accept your answer. Correct.
I also like just institutional adoption. I keep a pretty close eye on the intersection of traditional finance and Bitcoin. There's a lot of debate about whether it's good or bad. But I think it's important because I think most normies are going to get access to it. And I think it's just important understanding how to do that the right way, where they're holding their own keys and they're actually holding Bitcoin and not some IOU. But like, for instance, it's like BlackRock news. It's like,
yeah, I was going to ask.
It's like, obviously BlackRock being the largest asset manager, it's a big win for Bitcoin in terms of it probably won't get banned by the government because the BlackRock just controls the government, I feel like, and regulators. And so from that standpoint, it's good, but it's not real Bitcoin. It's just an IOU. And so from that standpoint, it's not that great. And it could lead to externalities where you're cheering it on now. And then 5 years down the road, you're like, oh, that actually was pretty bad development. And so I keep a really close eye on the intersection and adoption of things like that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think the ship of, or the idea that the government will like ban Bitcoin, I think that has sailed long ago, to be honest. But I think that the risk is this continued sort of capture of Bitcoin. Like this is a regulatory capture, the KYC capture, and so I see that being the kind of potential dark path that we have to resist. And I think speaking to what you just said, I think the most important thing is that we are creating educational tools and encouraging people to understand why it is important to custody their own Bitcoin. And I imagine places like BlackRock are going to, and Coinbase are, for very obvious reasons, are going to actively disincentivize that kind of learning and behavior. It's one of the things I think is interesting about Swan is that Swan's great about forcing people to understand that, or as they're ready to.
Yeah, and we try to just push people to self-custody, I mean, all the time if we can. It's literally half of our education is just trying to push people to that, because I think people are kind of afraid. But I see people saying like fuck banks and all those things, and I kind of understand the sentiment. But Bitcoin's for enemies, man, and it's happening whether you like it or not. And NYDIG's onboarding 1,000 credit unions and banks and allowing their technology. They're building the technology infrastructure to allow these banks to provide Bitcoin exposure directly into their banks. And so this is happening whether Bitcoiners like it or not. It's just a matter of education and trying to make sure that people understand what they own and what kind of Bitcoin they own, because obviously there's a big difference between owning real spot Bitcoin and holding your own private keys, and then owning these like pseudo fake IOU Bitcoins.
Yeah, that's one of the hardest things I find to explain to people, because people are so used to everything already being an IOU. They're like, well, I mean, I have stocks. And I'm like, no. You don't own those stocks. You don't own those equities. It's an IOU for the stock. And with when you try to explain to people the idea that with Bitcoin, you can take full custody of it, that can be a challenge sometimes. But I feel like with things like Celsius, it becomes easier to frame it in a way that people get. Most people are shocked that, places like Celsius and have gone up, and then you just can't get your assets anymore. They're like, but this is America. And it's like, no, you signed on the dotted line. You should have read more carefully. this is what it means.
Yeah. Yeah, Bitcoin maxis for being all toxic for a reason, I guess. Uh, I think that's an important point with stocks and the IOUs too, because that's actually with real estate as well. We talked about real estate before. It's a big difference between owning Bitcoin and real estate, because you kind of don't really own the real estate. You own a deed given to you by the government, and it's a highly illiquid asset. Whereas Bitcoin, I feel totally comfortable having my net worth in my head with 12 words that I actually own. And same thing with stocks. Like you said, you just own an IOU to a brokerage who owns an IOU to the DTCC. You're in this like chain of ownership and you're way at the bottom. Whereas Bitcoin, you actually own it. And it's actually what makes Bitcoin so important. And the final bearer instrument. Yeah, Kessler said it. So that's a huge difference between real estate and why people, I think, say Bitcoin or real estate's a shitcoin. Because again, when you read through these really troubling times in history when currencies fail, real estate doesn't really work that well in that environment, especially if you own land. If you own actually productive land, it typically gets taken over by the government, especially if there's some kind of food crisis. Because they basically just take it over and say, hey, we have a food crisis. We don't care that you own this farm. We're going to take it over. We'll buy it from you, quote unquote, even if you don't like it. And there's nothing you can really do about that because it's illiquid. It's not like you can pick up your house and move it or move the land. And so important distinction. It's one of those ones where, again, people in the West don't really think about it. People in hard emerging market economies instantly understand this stuff because they've lived through it.
I want to explore. We talk a lot on this show, mind you. Nothing we have said is financial advice. Yes, I did tell you to go rob a bank if you're under 18 naked. That is not financial advice, but and none of what we have said or will say should be construed as such. The Bitcoin IOUs, super, super important. All that reads like is fractional reserve banking has entered has existed within the Bitcoin exchange system, and it's not some new phenomenon. I'm curious both of your thoughts. Like, is this a necessary evil? Like, will it continue to be practiced, fractional reserve banking, in the eyes of through exchanges with Bitcoin, or will that practice come to a stop at some point in the future?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry. Sorry, Q.
Like, do you think, I'll back it up a little bit. So I think that I fully believe that if everyone went on all exchanges right now to withdraw Bitcoin, there is not enough Bitcoin in circulation, and that some people are going to get rugged because there are too many Bitcoin IOUs out there because of fractional reserve banking. Do you think that this is a system that's going to continue to exist within the Bitcoin ecosystem, or will eventually it have to stop after one too many rug pulls?
I mean, it should stop. I mean, it depends how much pain a lot of people need to learn the hard way, unfortunately. Like, you could try to educate them. You can try to say all these things and warn them. But I think a lot of people are just going to have to learn the hard way. And so I think you'll have waves of this, of people learning and people learning and people learning. Maybe one day people will get it. I think there's incentive from the incumbents to want a big IOU system to basically potentially be able to manipulate the Bitcoin price easier. Now, I think there's differences between Bitcoin and gold, because this is what happened to gold, right? The IOU market became so large and it kind of suppresses the spot market. And I think Bitcoin, the fact that you can take self-custody of it so easily, as well as its volatility, makes it extremely difficult to short Bitcoin with cash settled futures contracts. And so it makes it really dangerous to try to suppress the price of Bitcoin. Can shoot up and blow these positions out, whereas gold is a lot less volatile. So it's more easier to do that with an IOU market. And so I think over time, there's going to be this dynamic where there's going to be incumbents that are trying to push these IOU Bitcoins, these fake Bitcoin. But we'll see if retail and people over time, as they keep getting burned, will start to value self-ownership and taking ownership of their private keys more and more. So I'm kind of optimistic. I think people will start to understand this, because it's really a reflection of the environment they're in. It's a product of the environment of, if we continue to get more financial warfare and censorship and seizures against the citizens of sovereign nations, kind of like what we saw in Canada, more and more people are going to wake up to the value proposition of holding your own keys. And so I do think that over time, just because I think the traditional financial system will be more aggressive towards individuals, I think more and more people will get it. And so that's my hope, at least.
It's fair. I hope to be the general manager of the Los Angeles Lakers one day too. So I hope that comes true.
I'll be the Bulls. My Bulls will take the Lakers, dude.
Oh, I'll see you in the finals, my friend, just in like 40 years.
Yeah.
I'm going to play the contrarian bastard, as Anthony Scaramucci famously called me, but like, I don't buy that, Sam. I think there's a little bit of naivety to believe that every single person is going to understand, want, and like put in the work to actually self-custody. And I think that there will be opportunities for different services, no different than Swans, and others that we're not even thinking about yet, that will come up to say, like, actually, let me hold it on your behalf. And they could be legit services like Unchained, or they could be pure scams like Celsius. Like, I don't see those offerings going away. So I actually think there's going to be this moment or window of opportunity. What is it on those businesses, no different than Swan or Unchained, when they are going to offer clients the opportunity to hold their Bitcoin on their behalf? Like, what is it on? And I'm not trying to get you in trouble with Swan to like say anything right or wrong here, more from the lens of like, what is your responsibility as a business in that situation where people are entrusting you to be sort of the de facto self-custody person in this scenario?
Well, I think the first thing is education. So it's not the best way to do it, right? So I mean, it's not ideal for anybody or any trusted third party, as well intentioned as they are. There's risks, and so you shouldn't trust anybody with your Bitcoin. So the first thing is education, and just being very, very clear about that. Now, if somebody's like, no, I do not want it, like, I don't care what you say, blah blah blah, what you can do is obviously not rehypothecate the funds. Don't do anything with the funds. Don't even allow yourself access to the funds. And so Swan has like zero access to it. It's held in a trust under their name. And so they have legal rights to the actual spot Bitcoin. And there's no funny business going on behind the scenes like some of these other firms. And then there's also just like making sure that you have the security that you can possibly offer for your clients. And so it's really about like, it's making sure that they understand, like, okay, we get it. Like, you don't want the hassle of taking your own keys. You don't want to take that risk. But that's wrong. Like, you should take it. You should not trust us with it. But if they insist on it, then we have to provide them with the top of the line security, and then protect their Bitcoin from everybody else, like including ourselves. So giving them legal access or rights to it, and all these like other things and protections in place to protect their sats, essentially. But I think Q, like, I think we can't even begin to think about what self-custody is going to look like in the years to come. Like, I think it's going to, I believe that innovation is going to keep growing, and that it's going to be so much easier to take your self-custody or Bitcoin in the future. I think right now we're in this period of the early days of tough UI, and I think it'll be very, very easy in the future. At least I hope so. So that's kind of like a pushback to your comment about the naivety. Like, we don't know what it's going to look like. We don't know 15 years, 20 years, what these tools are going to look like on Bitcoin or with Bitcoin, with self-custody, what companies are going to exist. It might look back and be insane to think about even like multi-sig, like, oh my God, I can't believe we did that, because there's so much better tools in the future that we can't even fathom right now.
I totally agree with that. That's why I'm very careful to say something like everyone won't self-custody, because I kind of feel like that's that same argument where people try to say like, oh, everyone's not going to run their own node. Yeah, well, you know what? Someone also said everyone's not going to route the internet through their home one day, or not everyone's going to have electricity in their homes. So I'm careful to not say like, oh, they're not going to go for the technology, but I think there is an inherent laziness in our society where if there's an offering where it's like, oh, I don't have to memorize 12 words, sure, why not? Like, it's going to make my life easier.
Yeah, no, I hear that. I hear that. It's hard to think about the future, what it's going to look like. I hope it's easier though. I think it's an important thing to improve upon. This is why, like, I'm still reading about it, but like Fediments, it's just like another example of innovation occurring in the custody space. Like, who knows if that's the thing, or if that's going to play out the way people think it is, but it could make things a lot easier and just offer a different option for people that's a little better than just like trusted third parties.
So we have some breaking news right now, but Bitcoin has solved a problem in the world. P, if you'd like to share.
Yeah, absolutely. The city is mowing the grass like directly outside my window, and in the private chat, I asked like, "Does Bitcoin fix this?" And the answer was maybe. We took my mic off mute, and you guys can't apparently hear it. So, as I said privately to Q, thank you for airing our dirty laundry. Bitcoin really can fix anything.
As I said, the wealthy benefactor P, Bitcoin fixes this. When you give someone 100 Bitcoin to shut up, they'll shut up. So that worked. Bitcoin fixed it.
I don't understand the entire premise we just went through, but I'm going to take it.
I'm trying to start a thing where you're just a wealthy benefactor.
Great. Yeah, why not? Why not? I mean, dog food over here, and I just do it for the shits and giggles. Sam, one of the things that I think is really interesting about Bitcoin is, of course, we all come to Bitcoin from very different perspectives. And a lot of the things that we explore and do outside of Bitcoin tend to inform our experience of and understanding of Bitcoin, even though it might seem at first glance like they would have nothing to do with each other. I'm curious. For me, I one of the things I studied was biology, and so I really kind of get obsessed with like biological systems and feedback and feedback loops and things like that. And I find that applies in many ways, or it affects my thinking on Bitcoin. I'm curious, what are some of the things that you're interested in that have affected your thinking on Bitcoin as you're going through and doing your analysis for Swan?
Yeah, so I studied biology too. So I would actually say the same thing. I was a biology and physics major, and I studied anatomy, and I have a doctorate in physical therapy. So
no shit.
I did
all right.
Yeah. So I did a lot of understanding the same thing, just complex systems and feedback loops. And so when I came across Bitcoin, it just made a lot of sense to me as something that it, like, people call it like an organism because it's like steady. There's like a process to it, and it reminded me of like a cell, like a mitochondria, and like all these things that I learned about in biology. But that was part of it for sure. I think like my studying of the traditional financial set, like on my free time, like I just like understood immediately that Bitcoin was the solution because I had studied the problem very deeply. And so that was a huge part. Like I just immediately knew that my money that had an absolute scarcity, that couldn't be manipulated and couldn't be censored, and that acted outside the traditional financial system. Like I understood how important that was because I had studied the central banking system for years before that. So yeah, like everything you think about, like how you come to Bitcoin and how it's funny. Like I've also had this like rebellious streak my whole life of not accepting what I was told. And just like when I question things in class or always kind of try to think differently. And that's just kind of like naturally who I was. And I find that a lot in Bitcoiners, and I don't really know what that's about. But when I came to Bitcoin and everyone else was doubting it, for me, I just wanted to run to it, and I wanted to try to learn why everyone was hating on it so much. And I just have always been that way. So same thing when I was in business, because I was actually a business major, and I left business to go to biology because I was questioning the Keynesianism so much. And I didn't know about Austrian economics at the time, but my professors just hated me because I kept asking them questions about how stupid these like Keynesian principles were, and they didn't really have good answers for me. And so then I left because I was like, this is bullshit. Like this business classes are bullshit. I don't really understand. And biology made sense to me, and physics made sense to me because physics is truth. Like you can't fake gravity. And I see that a lot of similarities between physics and biology and Bitcoin. So it's like my friend Brandon Quittem, like I saw Bitcoin's a living organism. So maybe I'm just influenced by Brandon too. We're pretty close at Swan.
I love it. I love it.
So as we wind down, Sam, we talked about a lot of things that we wanted to talk about. We talked about a lot of things that you did not want to talk about. And I appreciate you, as always, for entertaining my rambling tangents of a mad scientist. But is there anything that we didn't get a chance to touch on today that you're like, yo, let's talk about this for a little bit?
Well, the thing that I've been focusing on in my writing has been the euro. The euro is a shit coin. Like I just can't even tell you what problem that currency is right now. And I really went into a deep dive into the history of the euro, similarities between now and the European debt crisis of 2012. And right now, man, that's the second largest currency by trading volume, as well as central bank foreign currency reserves. And it's in a really precarious situation right now. And you have to think about Bitcoin. Bitcoin's competition isn't Ethereum. It's not these other cryptocurrencies. To me, it's fiat currencies and the main money that's used around the world. And so euro is the second largest one. And I just can't even tell you like what a problem it is. And it's going to be, I think it's going to be devalued again. I think there's nothing they can do to stop the money printers from going burr over there. And we're talking about a monetary union of 19 nations that are at risk of fragmenting if they don't really toe the line and walk on a balance rope to try to figure this thing out. And so that's the one area that we didn't touch on that I've been pretty passionate about reading into. I'm just reading a lot of books on the euro, and it's a shit coin, man. It's a terrible. It reminds me of a shit coin. It reminds me of Ethereum because they just like throw like every time they do something, they have an emergency measure, and then there's some other problem that emergency measure causes, and then they have to do another band-aid fix, and then another band-aid fix, and another band-aid fix, and that's been going on for 20 years, at least since its existence, and it's kind of reaching this like pivotal moment right now. That's the one thing that we didn't touch on.
There was a tweet, I believe you sent it out, that was from a former U.S. either Fed chairman or Treasury secretary back in the 90s when the euro was formed. And it really foreshadowed a lot of what we're seeing now. Do you want to, am I correct in saying that that was something you tweeted out? Do you know what I'm talking about?
That was, so when the euro was being designed, this was also designed in the Bank of International Settlements. So just another example of how the BID kind of controls everything. But there was multiple major economists at the time, including Milton Friedman. And what you're referring to is Martin Feldstein, who was a Harvard economist and president of the National Bureau of Economic Research. And both of these guys were some of the biggest economists at the time, were warning about how bad this whole idea was. I mean, they were like, adoption of the euro would exacerbate political tensions. And basically these nations wouldn't have a currency to deal with exogenous shocks to their economies. And it's impossible to have a monetary union with disparate cultures, disparate economies, and disparate tax policies and fiscal policies. So that's why you're seeing, Italy, Greece, Spain and all these southern countries who spend a ton of money frivolously and wastefully and have slow growth, high unemployment, they're under the same currency regime as Germany, who's historically very conservative and doesn't spend a lot of money. But when you have these differences under one currency, simply doesn't work and actually leads to more political tension. And the reason why it went through wasn't because of economics. They ignored all these warnings because this was really a political construct of they wanted to stop potential world wars. They wanted to create union. So even a central banker by the name of Rupert Panay-Ray, he said it was completely misdesigned. You shouldn't create a monetary union with such disparate economies. Doesn't work. There's a lot of economists saying that, but politicians said they know better, and politicians said we're creating history, and they ignored everything. And so a lot of these underlying structural design flaws of the euro came into view in the European debt crisis 2012. They printed a ton of money, masked over all the problems, and now those same issues are coming in 2022, except the debt GDP ratios are nearly double across the board of all these countries, except even more. So they're in a more precarious situation. And I really have a hard time seeing how the euro will end, or how it will get through this, and then how it won't end really violently and chaotically. And if the second largest fiat currency is on the verge of collapse, Bitcoiners should wake up to that fact. And I think a lot of people maybe know a little bit about it, but they don't really know the history and how just terrible idea it is.
So we're fucked. At least not us. Actually, if anything, fiat cuckbuck dollars are great right now. So plan your trip to Europe by buying a ticket to Bitcoin Amsterdam. Use promo code BMLive and get 10% off. I have
that
no
was a cool
shame.
commercial, by the way. I like that.
Yeah. He's been trying to do that for weeks.
But waiting for one guest to bring up Europe, I can't do it genuinely. So thank you, Sam. I've been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, there you go, man.
Yeah, man.
Yeah,
thank you so much for
honestly,
joining us. This is awesome.
That's where you should advertise Bitcoin is Europe. They're gonna need it.
Sam, let's hand it off to you for where can people stay up to date with your thoughts? How can they know where you're writing? And what is Corey Klippstein's LinkedIn status for tonight going to be?
Yeah, they can follow me on the Swan blog. And so I write I do a lot of the newsletters. So you can subscribe to our monthly newsletter at Swan. I kind of help out with that. Daily Bitcoiner, help Corey with that. You could talk about, you can go look at the blog where I just kind of post random blogs sometimes, as well as Twitter. So I'm at Sam Callahan, SamCallah. I'll probably be publishing my pretty big deep dive into the euro probably like next week or something like that. So if you're interested in kind of hearing that, keep an eye out. I'll post it on Twitter and kind of see if you'll enjoy that. But yeah, man, just really appreciate coming on here. Check out swan.com, my shameless shill. I think it's a good place to dollar cost average, set up Bitcoin savings plans, and just make sure you're stacking sats during this bear market. This is the time where you can get really good long-term entry points. So that's what I'll leave with.
Absolutely. And the last thing I'll say is like and subscribe, Bitcoin Magazine YouTube channel, all the people that are currently talking to you right now, starting with Sam Callahan. Lots of signal, no noise. My friends, we'll see you tomorrow.
Thanks, fellas. I'll catch you around.
If you're in Nashville, come to the meetup tonight.
Yes.
I'm not. Are you guys going to be in Bitbok Boom?
I will not be.
I will be.
Oh, that's sad. All right, cool. I'll see you, P. Q,
Yeah.
You're a loser.
Heard that one before.
I love you, brother.
All right. Adios.
Thanks, guys.